Okay, so we can start. We can start off. We'll do 3 bows to the Buddha. We'll do it mentally. 1, 2, 3. And now I'll do one time the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. And then I will do the sharing of the screen. Let's see where that function is. Okay, I assume the text is visible to everybody?
Yes, Bhante.
Okay, so we are continuing now. This is actually the 4th session we have on this one sutta, because it's a very dense and rich sutta called the Nibbedika Sutta in Pali, and we translate it in English as penetrative, or the penetrative. The Buddha calls this the penetrative Dhammapariyaya, exposition of the Dhamma. And just to review, in the sutta, the Buddha is going to elaborate on 6 topics, taking each topic from 6 points of view. So the 6 topics are sensual pleasures, feelings, perceptions, the asavas, translated here as the taints, karma, and then the 6th is dukkha, or suffering. And the 6 angles from which each subject is to be understood is by way of the meaning of the topic itself, the origin of that particular factor, the diversity or differences within it, the result or consequence of that factor, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessation. And so in previous classes, we've already covered the first 5, sensual pleasures, feelings, perceptions, the asavas, and karma. And now we just have one session left, and that is the word dukkha, which is translated here as suffering. But the word dukkha, it's really has a whole range of implications and meanings, which are very difficult to encapsulate, to incorporate into any one English rendering. Now, do you see the word file, which I just want to use for the purpose of putting in? Actually, I don't have to use some notes. We could just go to the Pali itself. Okay, is the word file visible? We have Chinese and Pali.
Yes, Bhante, we can see it.
Okay, so we have the word dukkha, which sort of the original sense of dukkha, I think, is simply a bad state. And of course, dukkha is contrasted with sukha, which is an agreeable or pleasant state. And I think the original sense or usage of dukkha in pre-Buddhist Indian just languages was to indicate pain, especially bodily pain. But the Buddha took this word over and gave it a very broad, universal sense so that it applies to all factors of experience, every element or all conditioned phenomena, whether internal to oneself or external, are dukkha, not in the sense that everything within oneself is suffering or painful, not that everything outside is suffering or painful, but rather in the sense that everything, all conditioned phenomena are, maybe we could say, defective, imperfect, flawed, um, defective, deficient in some way. Yeah, I've heard just somebody a few days ago visited me and asked me about whether there's an explanation of dukkha that we see sometimes as the axle of a wheel which is off balance so that the cart doesn't proceed smoothly, doesn't ride smoothly. But that's not really a literal meaning of the word dukkha. And I explained to the person who inquired that that explanation will work in Pali, but it doesn't work in the related language of Sanskrit. The way that explanation of dukkha as a wheel that is off, the axle of a wheel that's off balance comes about, we have the prefix dur, which means bad. And then there's a Pali word, I think is a feminine, akka, which means the axle of a wheel. And so when you put dur plus akka together, sort of you merge the two words, and then you get dukkha. So that works as a pun, the kind of wordplay in Pali, but it doesn't work in Sanskrit, and probably Vedic Sanskrit would have preceded the Buddha, where the word for axle in Sanskrit is, I think it's a feminine, aksha. So if you put dur, but you see the word for, the corresponding word for dukkha in Sanskrit is dukkha, dukkha, almost the same as dukkha. Okay, but if you put it's in Sanskrit, dur plus aksha together, what you get is not dukkha, but you get duraksha, a bad axle, but not dukkha. You know Indian languages, so that's correct. Yeah. Yeah. So it's when we hear dukkha said to derive from the sense of an axle of a wheel that's not in balance, um, don't think that that's the literal meaning, the original literal meaning of dukkha, but that is a kind of word play that comes, I think it comes in the Visuddhimagga and the commentaries, which like to derive words through plays on other words. Okay, so let us, whoops, we don't need sukha here. So let us now look at our text. Going down to the expository section. Okay, so now the Buddha is going to expound each of these, the subject of dukkha from each of these 6 angles. And a lot of this you'll recognize as corresponding very closely to the exposition that we see in the famous first sermon of the Buddha, the Dhammachakrapavatana Sutta, the discourse setting in motion the wheel of Dhamma. Okay, so first we have to explain how dukkha or suffering should be understood. Okay, and here the Buddha begins, here he begins by enumerating aspects of experience in which the sense of suffering it is actually manifest or evident or clear. But then he's going to bring the meaning of dukkha down to that deeper, more universal level. So he starts off with birth is suffering, old age is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering. So the way I understand it, like these 4 aspects or these four particular aspects of human experience indicate types of suffering that are rooted in the nature of our bodily existence. So any single life begins with here what's translated as birth or jati, but the way the jati is explained in the suttas that enumerate, we could see that birth actually signifies not just the experience of coming out from the mother's womb, but it indicates conception, the time when the life process begins. And so that whole period, beginning from conception, going through the embryonic stage, the fetal stage, and then the expulsion from the womb, all of that is covered by the word jati, or birth. And then if you look in the Visuddhimagga in chapter 16, the section on the Four Noble Truths, it'll give elaborate explanations of how birth is suffering. Sometimes I have to say texts like the Visuddhimagga sometimes sort of overdo it by by exaggerating almost the negative side of things that are generally undesirable. They sort of relish painting this dark and gloomy picture of the world. Okay, so we start off with birth is dukkha, and really what follows birth is also dukkha, that is not elaborated within this section. But we could say even, I mean, if I don't think we have any children in the class, so all of us have gone through adolescence. Is adolescence fun? Of course, there's a lot of fun in adolescence when you look back at it. Wow, such a time of a lot of struggle, conflict, tensions, uncertainty, perplexity, sometimes gloom, misery, social anxieties, the kids in the class, do they like me? Do they not like me? Okay. So adolescence is really dukkha. Applying for college, sukha or dukkha. Also dukkha. And then going through college, of course, there's a lot of fun, but also there's a lot of dukkha. Okay, so the whole life process, you could say, is dukkha, but it's not always so manifest. But then one gets to old age, jara. So then we have the loss of vitality in the body, the sense organs are no longer functioning so effectively, have to wear glasses, reading glasses. Some people need hearing aid. The hair, we cherish the beautiful hair, turns gray or falls falls out. And so you have to keep in style, you have to dye the hair. Okay. Then the skin gets wrinkled. We like to have the beautiful glowing skin, but it gets wrinkled. The teeth will decay and break. And I said the body gets weak. Sometimes when it gets really weak, have to walk with a walking stick, or even then have to walk with a walker. And then a lot of pains increase with old age. Okay, and then illness is suffering. So we can enumerate, so many types of illness. And then death is suffering. Though it seems to me, actually, my personal opinion is that I don't know whether the experience of death is really suffering in itself, but we could say that the anticipation of death is what is suffering. That we always think that when I die, I'm going to be obliterated, I will cease to exist entirely. And so that thought of the obliteration at death and the separation from everyone that I cherish and love, and from every aspect of my life that I cling to and cherish. So that is, I think, what brings the suffering. Yes, and what we hear from people who have undergone what they call the NDE, the near-death experience, and then come back, almost invariably, the reports that I've heard is that it's almost a blissful experience, that when the separation starts to take place from this life, they find themselves in a bright, the reports are so similar across different cultures, entering a kind of bright tunnel where there's a lot of luminosity, and then sometimes a person will appear, a kind of being as a guide, sometimes several beings who will be serving as the guide. And sometimes temporarily they find themselves, maybe this is the report of good people, in a sphere, a domain where everything is bright and luminous. But since these are near-death experiences, not full-death experiences, the person comes back. So we don't know what the final severing of all ties to this life will be like. Okay, so this is the four aspects that are rooted in physical suffering. Then we have an enumeration of other different aspects of suffering. And the way we understand this, the middle one, pain, refers to actual bodily pain. And the others are expressions of mental suffering. So we have sorrow, especially through separation from things and persons who are dear and beloved to ourselves, sorrow through disappointment, then lamentation. This is weeping and crying, where the sorrow is so intense that we break out into tears. Then pain, as I said, is bodily pain, which will be most clearly manifested in illness, but also in the various pains that occur even in our day-to-day life. Then comes dejection or domanassa. This, we could say, can cover almost, dejection is a rather strong word, but domanassa can cover almost any aspect of disappointment, sadness, any kind of negative, disagreeable mental state, a whole range. It can cover a whole range. The older translators used to render domanassa as grief, which I think might be too strong, or it might cover the extreme end of domanassa. But domanassa can begin with just even that little tinge of sadness that creeps into the mind, or that little darkness in the mood that can come into the mind. And then the last one, maybe anguish. I wouldn't use it today, but this is an older translation. Anguish is too strong. I think I would use misery today. Again, it's a very, very strong degree of mental suffering. Okay, so these are different expressions of mental suffering. And some texts in expounding dukkha have two other factors. I think the Chinese version has those. Let me just take a look. Actually, I'm not able to read it fast. Okay. Okay, but the two that come in the Pali also in other expositions is separation from that which is beloved and agreeable, and union, association with what is disagreeable. So especially separation from people who are dear and beloved to ourselves, and coming together with people or situations that are disagreeable. So it's not mentioned here, but we find that in the, I think in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. And then we have, this is so pervasive, it's almost like the root of mental suffering. Not to get what one wants is dukkha. And so many things we always, so sort of the nature of the mind is always to be wanting what we don't have. When we get what we want, temporarily we're happy, but that happiness will wear off. It doesn't last. And even the thing that we desired so much, after a few weeks, few months, a year or so, the happiness vanishes and it just becomes just an aspect of our everyday life. And when we see something else, an alternative, which is more beautiful, more expensive, more efficient, then the craving, we become dissatisfied with what we obtained and we desire something else. That's why, for example, Apple can renew its iPhone every few years. You have iPhone 6, then it gives way iPhone 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We're at 13 now?
16.
Wow. Oh, they're too fast for an old fogey like me. Okay, so if you have an iPhone 12 and you see other people going around with iPhone 16, that iPhone 12 that you cherished a few years ago now is considered a pain in the neck, dragging you down, and you have to get the new iPhone. Okay, so not to get what you want is suffering or dukkha. And then this is the universalization of dukkha. It says the five, here in Pali, it's the panchupadana kanda dukkha. So literally, it's the five clinging aggregates are dukkha. And so in translating, we have to sort of, you could translate literally if you want, the five clinging aggregates are dukkha. Maybe I would do that today. But back then, I introduced like an element of interpretation. The five aggregates subject to clinging are dukkha. And this is based on the commentary. So what are the five aggregates? The five upadana kanda, the five clinging aggregates. We know what they are by way of enumeration: bodily form, feeling, perception, mental, volitional activities, and consciousness. But they're said to be subject to clinging in that these are the bases for clinging. It's not that all five aggregates are clinging in themselves. The body is not clinging. Feeling is not clinging. Perception is not clinging. And consciousness is not clinging. But the clinging itself is the mental factors of greed or attachment and wrong views, which belong to the aggregate of volitional activities. But all five of those aggregates can become the objects of clinging. And that is what makes them upadana kanda, aggregates subject to clinging. So what we cling to bodily form, and the specific way in which clinging manifests is with the notions, this is mine, or this is what I am, and then more theoretically formulated, this is myself. So we take all five aggregates or particular ones amongst them to be mine, my possessions, to be a kind of substantial I, some kind of ego entity, or to be a self, a lasting, enduring ego entity. And that is what makes the five aggregates subject to clinging. And even the activity of clinging to them brings along a kind of dukkha. It's sort of accompanied by an underlying tone of, with this grasping and clinging, there's an underlying tone of, you could say, anxiety, a very subtle anxiety, a need to continually like reestablish our identity and our sort of our status, our position in the world. And then when these aggregates that we identify with, when they change and fall away, then actual felt dukkha or suffering arises. Okay, so this takes care of the noble truth, or actually he's not calling them the noble truths here. So this takes care of the way the dukkha is to be understood. Then we come, what is the source of origin, what source and origin of dukkha? And he says, craving is its source, its origin. And again, this is what we find in the statement, the common statement of the second noble truth. And the way we usually understand this is that because of craving, which is that sort of manifests as that grasping and attachment, when things fail to meet our expectations, when the things we crave, when we fail to get the things that we want, then we experience suffering, as stated here, or when we obtain the things we want and they fail to meet our expectations because of that craving, we experience dukkha. And that is certainly true. I mean, that is one aspect of the causal role that craving plays in relation to dukkha. But underlying that, there's a deeper meaning which is not immediately evident. And here, I would say that craving is the origin of dukkha, in that the process of rebirth through samsara, the round of repeated birth and death, is driven by craving. So craving is sort of the underlying dynamic force that drives the round of birth and death. So when death takes place, the reason why it's followed by a rebirth, by a new birth, is because that craving for repeated existence is still operative, still in place. And so craving, even in the usual formulation we have, tanha pono bhavika. Let me put in that word. Let me use the other word file. Yeah, so craving is described as pono bhavika. And then this is derived from the word puna, which means again or repeated, and bhava, existence. So craving is said to be pono bhavika, that which leads to renewed existence, to repeated existence. And existence, any existence, begins with jati, with birth, and then evolves on or develops on through childhood, adolescence, college days, working days, family days, to old age, illness, and death. Okay, so this is the origin, source and origin of dukkha is craving. And then the diversity of dukkha. Okay, then we have here distinctions made: extreme suffering and mild or slight suffering, and suffering that fades away slowly and suffering that fades away quickly. And so we have four divisions in the diversity of dukkha. And the Chinese version, or the version translated into Chinese, um, makes permutations out of these. So we have suffering, extreme suffering that fades away slowly, and extreme suffering that fades away quickly, and slight suffering that fades away slowly, slight suffering that fades away quickly. It all seems a little bit artificial in order to fill in diversity, a diversity item here. Okay, then the result of dukkha is interesting here. Okay, so we have someone, let me just get everything into view. Okay, so we have someone who is overcome by suffering. So here it's really felt, experienced suffering. Suffering is misery and pain. With a mind obsessed by it, sorrows, languishes, and laments, weeps, beating his breast, and becomes bewildered. Just when you get really oppressed by extreme, strong suffering. I guess the image here, beating the breast. I don't know if we do this in American culture, but I've seen, you have it in Indian culture. Yeah, I've seen it in Sri Lanka when somebody loses, the woman loses a husband or the child loses a parent. They'll go beat the breast. Is it done? It's not strange the way this is seems to be a culturally determined expression of sorrow. Okay, and then the text continues, or else, again, overcome by suffering, the person goes on a outside search saying, who knows one or two words for putting an end to this suffering? And just want to see the note here. Yeah, actually, this is interesting. Okay, the commentary says, explains this as a search for a mantra to end suffering. And then the Chinese parallel, so the commentary says the meaning is, who knows a mantra, a one-word mantra or a two-word mantra? And then the Chinese parallel, this is 600b, take a look at it. 600b 17. Oh, this is it, right. Yeah, the Chinese parallel uses the word "zhou." Is it "zhou"?
Zhou.
"Zhou," which means mantra. And yeah, it goes on the typical. This is interesting, the way the Chinese sort of elaborates on, I think, what's implicit in the Pali, that we have the uninstructed, foolish, worldly person, the one who does not associate with good friends, with the noble, is not skilled in the noble Dhamma, and so on. And this person, when it says that the text says he searches outside, it means that they go to some outside shramana, some outside ascetic or outside Brahmin, and they're searching for a mantra of one word, 2 words, 3, 4, even many words, even searching for a mantra of 100 words, seeking to cure that dukkha, that suffering. Okay, so that is, I think it's actually really implicit in the Pali, though the Pali simply one embarks upon a search outside. But what is meant is, I mean, you're in India, you're originally from India, and I know I've witnessed this in Sri Lanka, even though they're Buddhist, but they'll go to the to the Indian person of Indian Brahminic descent, searching, or sometimes there'll be Sri Lankan Buddhist pujaris, so sort of these are temple priests who specialize in mantras. And so when they have some kind of suffering themselves or problems with children, husband, wife, they'll go to the pujari, the priest, or the Brahmin to get some mantra that will help to eradicate their suffering. Or in the Buddhist temples, there'll be a section on the side reserved for the devas. So people go to the Buddha, and in the central shrine, they'll worship the Buddha because the Buddha shows the way to nirvana. But on the side, sort of a little bit off course, there'll be a little shrine to Vishnu or to Kataragama, the god Kataragama, or a shrine to Patani, the goddess Patani. And people will go there and pray to be relieved from their everyday suffering. Who is the god of Kataragama? Mu something? I don't remember the name.
Muruhan.
Muruvan, that's it.
Muruhan.
Muruvan, that's right.
Muruhan.
Okay, so that is searching sort of outside for a way to get rid of dukkha. But we would also have to say that the wise, noble disciple who's skilled in the discipline of the noble ones will then take up the Noble Eightfold Path as the way to the end of dukkha. Okay, so what is the cessation of suffering? Again, cessation of craving. There is cessation of suffering. And whoops. Then what is the way leading to the cessation of dukkha, the suffering? It is that Noble Eightfold Path, going from right view to sama samadhi, to right concentration. And so then the Buddha sums up this section. Again, he brings in it's not just a matter of laying out a doctrine, but these are the things to be understood. Yeah, the Chinese version makes that clearer by saying in relation to each one knows that this is the case. In the Pali version, the aspect of knowing comes at the end of the section. So the noble disciple thus understands dukkha, the source and origin of dukkha, the diversity of dukkha, the result of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. Then he understands this, the Vedika brahmacharya, this penetrative spiritual life, to be the cessation of dukkha. And so that is said because of this. And so this, then the Buddha just concludes the whole discourse by saying that this is that penetrative exposition of the Dhamma. Okay, we could see if any people have questions. So let me look at the participant list. Okay, we can start with Johnny. Johnny, you can unmute.
Good morning, Bhante.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be wrong to see seeking mantra or other religions help, just like knowing this is does not solve the root cause of suffering? It's just like seeing a medical doctor for Tylenol for my headache, while the real cure to cancer is
Yeah.
being practiced.
Yeah, I think it's quite possible that, I don't know, I've never had experience using mantras, but it's possible that somebody who could skillfully use a mantra can use it to expel certain types of suffering. Perhaps when people have suffering due to, and I believe this happens by possession of spirits, harmful spirits that might be causing the suffering. Maybe the use of the mantra can expel that harmful spirit, or maybe even just with ordinary physical ailments, the mantra can cure the physical ailment. It's quite possible. I don't want to discount those possibilities. Whether whether it works through psychological suggestion or true spiritual power, that I don't know. But I don't see any harm for a person going to find somebody who could teach a mantra to get rid of a temporary experience of suffering, if they have belief that that will work. I mean, just like we go to see a medical doctor to cure an illness or to get some medicine to cure an illness, we don't think to get rid of the illness, I have to achieve full enlightenment. Yeah, and by the way, Tylenol doesn't require a prescription from a medical doctor. Okay, so
Thank you, Bhante.
yeah, we go to Vandana.
Thank you, Bhante, for your teachings. So I was just curious to know that why the word breast is used instead of just simply chest, because in Indian culture we usually the word chhati, meaning is Hindi, can be used for both male and female.
Yeah, that would have,
I was just curious to understand this more.
yeah, I think the word breast is not exclusively a female. I mean, maybe in contemporary American usage, it's come to designate the breast of the female, but
Like when you say breast milk, or
yeah,
so
but it probably, if you look at translations of the Iliad and Odyssey, where they're describing the battle, well, the Iliad, the battles, the warrior puts on the breastplates before going into the battle. Yeah, it's a neutral word, really, gender-wise.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And it would have been my translation choice, or probably I was modeling myself on earlier translators. Yeah. Okay, Mariam in California.
Thank you, Bhante. I have a question about practicing the way that we can on a daily basis to understand the dukkha and the craving and the clinging. So as we go through the day, do you have any recommendation as we seeing the dukkha coming? How can we catch ourselves to say, oh, don't fabricate anything, is just a sound at the ear? Or
Okay. How can we, I didn't catch the word, that how can we something ourselves?
how can we practice during the day, on a daily basis? How can we practice understanding the dukkha, basically?
I mean, basically, it's using the two sort of interrelated factors of mindfulness and clear comprehension. And we find that in the Satipatthana Sutta, it's laid out pretty, simply, directly, and clearly that when one experience, this is especially in regard to the painful feelings, when one experience, well, it comes in regard to all feelings, but including painful feeling. When one experiences a painful feeling, one knows one is experiencing a painful feeling. And then I would say also that when we undergo the experience of painful feeling, sort of the natural tendency is for the mind to become upset by the painful feelings, or to become even stricken with this domanassa, with dejection and misery because of bodily pain. When we get a persistent illness, then the mind can be overcome and sort of pushed down by the painful feelings. Yeah, in that case, the Buddha says what we're doing is putting a second pain, a second suffering on top of the original pain, the original suffering. So the original suffering, bodily pain, is under many circumstances unavoidable. So what we have to do is recognize when we are mentally fabricating and embellishing the physical pain by dwelling upon it and then letting the mind get sort of sucked down into it and then overwhelmed by it and crushed by it. So the way to emerge from that is to use mindfulness, to being aware of the painful bodily feeling, and to use sampajanya, clear comprehension, to understand that this is a feeling that has arisen through conditions. If it's a bodily illness, the illness has arisen because we have a body and maybe some microorganism or virus has invaded the body. If it's the pain that comes from, say, an accident or a burn or some kind of a fall and so on, understand that it's a pain that arises through those conditions. And we just stop at the level of bodily pain. At least we make the effort to do so without adding these mental elaborations, embellishments that turn it into mental suffering.
So basically, thank you, Bhante. So basically, see things as they come and they go. See them as a process that is coming into a present moment, and just watch them rather than thinking about what's happening or things like that. Just observe them and know they go through.
Yeah, and also, so often when we go through physical suffering, particularly suffering that arises through illness, but also when we meet with sort of disappointing conditions in life. I failed to get the job that I wanted. I failed to form a relationship with the person that I fall in love with. When I failed to get the appointment that I wanted, and so on. So these also, if we build up mental elaborations upon them and mentally embellish them with thoughts of I I didn't get this. There must be something wrong with me because she didn't accept my overtures of love, or I must be an inevitable failure because I didn't get that job or didn't get that promotion or appointment. So all of those thoughts are revolving around I. So if we recognize the I is just, fundamentally a false delusion, then I mean, we might feel some disappointment, but it's not as heavy if we cling to that idea of I as being a reality.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, next will be Tian Xiong. Tian Xiong. You can unmute. Okay.
Yes, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante. So, is this sutta the description of vipassana practice?
I don't see this as being sort of explicitly laying out a vipassana practice. But as I say that these are themes for contemplation and understanding, whereas in vipassana practice, one focuses in sort of much more directly on the immediate bodily and mental experience. But those are just labels. What is vipassana? What is the text of the sutta? Okay, so that was a simple question. So there was Elizabeth, did you have a question? I saw your hand.
Anne had a question, Bhante. Sumana.
Oh, Sumana did. Okay.
Bhante, I was just wondering if we have to experience to know dukkha, Bhante. For example, we craving for ice cream or maybe craving for Pali text or something. If we not experience, we keep papancha about ice cream, should we eat the ice cream and experience the dukkha, or should we just avoid it altogether? It's we haven't eat the ice cream, we don't know what is ice cream is about.
You understand that we should give up the ice cream altogether?
Yeah, or should we experience it and eat it mindfully?
Yeah, good suggestion. Maybe I'll take it up next year. Next summer, maybe I'll take it up. I have a good idea. I'll give up the ice cream for the winter. Yeah, no, I don't think you have to avoid everything that's pleasurable, but you can use it sort of, and even enjoy it, I would say, but without clinging to it. You don't want to take sometimes people who come to Buddhism take I call it a grim approach, too severe an ascetic approach. Have to give up everything that's enjoyable and just subject myself to as much deprivation as I can. You can enjoy the good things in life, but do so, at least those things that are not extremely unwholesome, but do so with right understanding and with right view, and try not to cling to them. Okay, I see another hand, Doran.
Thank you, Bhante, for your teachings and for the community you create for us. Just a quick question. What do you think about the translation of the word dukkha that I heard before and I like, but I don't know about whether it conceptually is correct or literally is correct, probably not. Unsatisfactoriness.
I'd say it's a pretty accurate translation, but it's rather clunky to use in a translation. So I often will bring in unsatisfactoriness when I'm giving an explanation. Like, in fact, I should have used it, maybe I didn't. But so what is the real meaning of dukkha? That these things are sort of looked at from a perspective of wisdom turn out to be unsatisfactory. But just, if what I found is that if you come to present the Buddha's teaching either in a translation or giving a talk, you say, so what are the Four Noble Truths? The Noble Truth of unsatisfactoriness. I don't even think the word unsatisfactoriness is in the dictionary. You'll find unsatisfactory, but I don't know that you'll find the noun form there. So it's a rather clunky word, but it's accurate in getting the sort of the sense or conveying the sense of dukkha.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, next will be Heather.
Thank you, Bhante. I'm curious about the word exposition in this text. I haven't been able to join the last few sessions that you've been covering this sutta, but I'm just wondering if the Pali word that was translated into exposition is really kind of fundamentally meaning understanding, or can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, an interesting word. Let me just write or type in the Pali word. Or I don't have to type it in, it's there. And let me increase the point size. Okay, do you see the Word file? Okay, so we have...
Yes, Bhante, we can see the word file.
Okay, so it's the word that's translated as exposition is pariyayo. And so it has the prefix pari, which usually suggests around, the idea of around, sometimes fullness, sometimes around. And then it's joined with the root, I think, or the stem aya, which has the sense of going. So it's pari plus aya, and then to join the two vowels, we get the y, and then a long vowel. So the literal sense is going around, and so it comes to be used pretty much as a synonym for when the Buddha is giving a more extensive discourse, which is covering a topic in detail. So maybe he's turning the subject around to expound it. But then the word pariyaya comes to take on another meaning, which is sometimes two modes of discourse of the Buddha are distinguished, pariyayena and nipariyayena. Whoops. Okay, so pariyayena is, you might say it's a figurative discourse of the Buddha. So this is one which makes use of similes, metaphors, stories, and so on in order to convey the teaching. So it's a way of going around the subject matter by embellishing it. Maybe we would say it's an embellished discourse. And then nipariyayena is a discourse which goes straight to the subject matter, like without using similes, metaphors, figures of speech. Okay, so any further questions? Oh, okay, yeah, I have to apologize to the people in the classroom. I've become so addicted or accustomed to using the computer that I forget to look around. Okay, Stacy. Yeah, you could take the microphone.
Thank you, Bhante. In terms of the five clinging aggregates as being dukkha, you said to that it's, you use it sort of as a way to practice. This is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. But I always think of it as a more visceral experience. Like if you imagine somebody taking your life, a more visceral experience. Like if you imagine or ever experience somebody, for instance, trying to harm you or take your life, you would realize how strongly you're clinging to the body, your life, including the mental, the nama part too. It's a little more challenging. Maybe that's where the clinging more to the mental experience, you can practice more, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. But in terms of the body, I always think of it as a clinging to form as a more visceral experience. Like if somebody were to kill you or.
So just I'll just repeat the question for the people online. So she's saying that she usually thinks when speak about upadana khandha, the clinging aggregate, especially in relation to the body, she thinks of it more in cases, say, where, say, the body is physically endangered or threatened, particularly if somebody is threatening to harm one physically, there comes a sort of innate clinging to the body. Yeah, I think that's the case, that there's a whole range of degrees and manifestations of clinging. So by way of the way it's usually expressed in the text is clinging to the five aggregates as being mine, I, and self. But maybe you could see the way the instinctive or innate clinging, rather than the conceptualized clinging, will appear, that when we face physical danger, a threat to our lives, to our well-being, that there comes that sort of natural, spontaneous clinging to the body.
Yeah, and in the fetters, the clinging to the fine material existence, I think it's the same. I think we're, most of us probably, hopefully, don't ever experience that, danger, but it would be hard to imagine the how much we cling to these bodies.
Yeah. Okay, I see one more hand, and this will have to be the last question. We'll have to end.
Bhante, it's a very short one, Namudaya, and thank you for your teaching. Bhante, do you speak German or Yiddish?
No.
Oh, because there is a wonderful word in German. It is Leiden. And Leiden can be suffering as well as positive.
Yeah. I mean, I have to confess, I studied German for 1 year in college, but
it is a very, very unique situation when I think about it, when I translate it in my own mind, because it really, that one word, and perhaps in your 1 year of learning German, German is quite expressive. But this one word, Leiden, a simple word that's used every day, can be used for, for suffering, for deep suffering, but also it can be interpreted to liking. So it's really an interesting concept, and I just wondered how we could relate that to sukha. Anyway, just an idea.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you know the word that the German translators of Buddhist texts use for dukkha?
No, I don't know. I am of German birth, but I rarely read the German versions of anything. But now that as we were speaking, I will look it up, and I will see what they use for the official translation in the German scriptures.
There's the old translations by Carl Eugen.
Yes, I'm familiar with.
And then there are more
translators,
modern.
and quite frankly, it's often badly translated. I wish they would translate it as good into German as you did into English.
Okay, I think we'll have to end now for the day. So let us end with the dedication of the merit. Yeah, don't get up. Okay, so we'll do the sharing of the merits with the Dhamma protecting devas, nagas, and other spirits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata Deva naga mahedika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang dukkha pata chani dukkha bhaya pata chani bhaya soka pata chani soka antu sabe pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we'll stand here and we'll do 3 bows to the, or half bows to the Buddha.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
And a bow to Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
Everyone
Bhante.
silent.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Be well, Bhante. Have a great lunch.
Thank you.
Everyone silent.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you for
everybody.
See you on Wednesday.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Bhante.
Everybody.
Yes, thank you,
Namo
Bhante.
Buddhaya.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thank
let me
you.
end the recording.
Okay, bye.
Bye, Bhante. Take care.